Meeting to order. Could you call the roll, please, Krista?
Mayor Durrani?
Here.
Councilman Barber? Councilman Girl?
Here.
Councilman Hogg?
Here.
Councilman McFarland?
Here.
Councilman Morris?
Here.
Councilman Odekirk?
Here.
Councilwoman Coleman? Here. Councilman Turk?
Here.
First on the agenda is the presentation of the proposed 2014 budget.
Jim? Rachel?
Thank you. I just, before we get started and I turn it over to the finance director, I just want to say something that since I've been here, a few of the council members have asked me whether or not they felt I'd been here long enough that I could really stand behind the recommendations of the budget. And I want you to know that the first time I looked at the budget was the first time you received a copy of it as well. So I really haven't had a sufficient amount of time to look at the proposed budget to say they're my recommendations, because I need more time to thoroughly understand the organization and the operational side. That being said, when I interviewed for this position, I told you that in order to become a high-performance organization, I believe that we need to start off by having a strategic planning session. So in the proposed budget, you'll see that there's some money set aside to hire a consultant to act as an outside facilitator. And in January, soon after the holidays, I'd like to bring somebody in to act as a facilitator and help us through that strategic planning process. That way we establish long-term goals for the community, and then we can look back at the budget and make sure that our expenditures are aligned with the objectives that we set to attain those long-term goals. That being said, the budget as proposed to you, including the staffing levels, I would not hire anybody, even though there are additional firefighter and police officer positions in the proposed budget, till we go through the strategic plan and make sure that we're spending our money wisely in the areas that are most important to us and attaining those goals. There is one exception. I believe we got an extension on the SAFER grant to hire, and we told them that as part of that extension we would hire one additional firefighter in January. At this point, I'll turn it over to the finance director for an overview, and then Chief Formals can address any specific questions you have about the SAFER grant and that one position, or any other questions that you have about the proposed budget. Thank you.
Good afternoon. As I mentioned before, this is really the culmination of what has been going on for over the last month. We started at the Finance Committee, where we went through the general fund revenue estimates, and then we did a presentation at the last council meeting of, as a whole, of the operating budgets for both the water and sewer, the general fund, and the parking fund. And then this last piece that we're going to show tonight is really a representation of kind of where all the numbers come in. So from an all funds perspective, what the numbers look like, and then a discussion about what capital projects have been recommended as part of the 2014 proposed budget. So, as a whole, the total all funds budget for 2014 is at $287.8 million. That is made up of $201 million of operating budget, $42 million in capital budget, and $43 million, almost $47 million in special funds. Just as one note of mention, the operating budget did go up about 3.6%. While we don't have any raises in the budget for specific salaries, there is increases still in insurance costs, in pension obligations, and so that's where the majority of the 3% comes from. Like City Manager Jim Hawk mentioned, there is two updates that we are going to present as part of the final proposed budget, and it is based on conversations that myself and the City Manager have had. One is an increase of $720,000, and that's to move the rate of interest on investment returns for the public safety pensions from the 7% down to the 6.875%, which is getting us closer to what we're actually seeing from actual performance perspective. And then the second piece piece, like the city manager said, is we did include what would have been the surplus, what we were estimating to be the surplus between revenues and expenses for this year, and we added that into the city manager's budget in order to accomplish the strategic plan and then implement any recommendations from that.
Rachel, how close is that 6.875 to the actual return?
Off the top of my head, I'm
Okay.
not sure.
Thank you.
I can get back to you on that, though.
Thank you.
So the capital budget is made up of 4 funds. It's the capital improvement fund, which is funded through transfers from the general fund. It has to do with any surpluses that we see in our general fund revenues. Then we would transfer into the capital improvement fund for purchases of new capital projects in the next year. The water and sewer improvement fund, which is funded through current revenues on the water and sewer system, surpluses that you see in that area. The motor fuel tax fund, which funds its restricted revenues. It's based off the motor fuel tax, and it funds any roadway projects. And then the property improvement fund, which is a little bit of a holding fund for in case we receive escrows during the year that would be needed for the subdivision improvements that a contractor would come in and would have been supposed to complete improvements within subdivisions, but then doesn't, so we draw down on the performance bond. There's $3.6 million in new capital projects recommended under the capital improvement fund. That includes about almost $600,000 for roof replacement and chiller replacement at the Joliet Public Police Department building. It includes $1.4 million in vehicle purchases for the police, the fire, and public works. That is a little bit higher than about $300,000 more than what we included in last year's capital budget. It includes about $230,000 for citywide technology upgrades, which includes the second year of the PC replacements, third year of the PC replacements, in order to get people updated laptops or desktops, depending on what their job function is. It includes about $266,000 to replace iWin computers in the police vehicles. They're getting old, and the software that they're running on it is not compatible with some of the new applications that are necessary in the police department. There's $240,000 for streetlight replacements, about $308,000 for EAB removal to do start a tree inventory and to continue with tree replacement after the EAB removal. And then another $125,000 is included for Gale and the Cass Street salt dome roof repairs. The water and sewer improvement fund is funded at about $18.4 million in 2014, this is where we see any improvements to the water and sewer system. The recommendation includes about $5.5 million for water main improvements at Belmont, Jefferson, Essington, Hattleman Terrace, and Midland. $2.1 million for the West Side Interceptor, or which is related to the CSO project. There's about $3.4 million in for lift stations improvements. Another $730,000 to continue the meter changeout program. $2 million is included for the East Side Sewer Treatment Plant improvements, $650,000 for the West Side Sewer Treatment Plant improvements, and about $250,000 for Aux Sable Treatment Plant improvements, which includes the number 4 effluent pump upgrade. The motor fuel tax fund, the estimated new revenue or annual revenues to that fund are about $3.6 million in 2014. Based on the balance that's in that fund, there is an estimate of $11.1 million in roadway projects. A lot of those are carryover projects from the prior years that, as most of us know, construction projects usually take more than 1 year. So there's a multi-year on most construction projects. Caton Farm Road, that continues in 2014, and the funding level for that is about $2.1 million. Essington to Hennington intersection improvements at $1.2 million. Illinois, or the I-55 and Route 59 improvements at almost $800,000. Some roadway resurfacing projects that almost $680,000. The Hutchinson to Prairie roadway project at about $273,000. You can read the rest of them, but as you can see, we're making some significant investment in our roadways, continuing with the motor fuel tax funds available to us. Oops. The property improvement fund, as I mentioned, the revenue source is really the developer performance bonds, and so if we draw down on them during the year, then they would be used to improve the projects that the bonds were designated for. The Caton Ridge at Clubland subdivision is one of the performance bonds that we have. The Caton Farm at County Line Road in Droughton. The Silverleaf subdivision improvements there's some performance or ESCO funds available for that. Newfield subdivision, Clublands, and Newstone Shire subdivision. The special funds budget is really the last piece of the overall 2014 proposed budget. And it includes about $43.6 million. As you can see, there's several funds that make up this last piece. The biggest is the Grants and Special Revenue Fund, that's the piece where the state funds for the multimodal project are accounted for through that fund. The General Obligation Debt Service at a 1.2, the Evergreen Terrace Fund at about 1.5. The Special Service Areas, that's for the City Center, and two other ones, the Target and then the TIF Increment Financing Funds. There's two of those, one for the City Center and one for Cass Street. And then there is a placeholder for the CDBG fund this year at about $5.5 million. Based on the settlement with HUD, we are trying to make some accommodations so that if and when we do receive that money, we would have authorization to be able to allocate it appropriately.
Rachel, a couple questions.
Yep.
As far as the CDBG fund, where would we be able to use that money? I know I don't need an extensive list, but if you can give us an idea where we could plug that in.
Is Alfredo? He's not here. You know what? At this time, I really don't know the specifics enough. I know that Jeff and I have talked about it a little bit. Based on the grant application, so the way any grant works is when you apply for the funds, you designate what you're going to use them for, and that's then how you get awarded those funds. I know that Jeff and I were just discussing the fact that the settlement agreement does have some stipulations that might require us to amend what we originally applied for those funds and could use them for. So I think that information is still, trying to be worked out based on what the settlement agreement is in regards to those funds.
And then for Evergreen Terrace, you have $1.5 million. Is that new money that's being put in the Evergreen Terrace fund?
No, it's not new money. That's what's remaining of the $3.5 million that we had available at the start of 2013.
Okay, thank you.
And as I mentioned, just some highlights. The 1.2 is the general obligation bond principal and interest payment that we have in 2014. $23 million is the multimodal transportation center budget. There's about $2.3 million left for the work on the Millsdale Road and Schweitzer Road. There is $1 million left on the federal grant for the Safer grant, and then about $2 million is of grant funds is available for the police department, and that includes the Tri-County Theft Program and the 911 grant. Are there any questions?
Let me make one comment. The mayor was asking earlier about what is the actual return of the police and fire investments, and typically what they do is what's called smoothing, which is take a 3 to 5 year period of those investment returns, because in any given year the stock market or the investment returns are going to go up and down, and so you don't want to look at that snapshot in any one year because it could be 8.5% or 4.5%. So they take that smoothing, and that's the number we'll look up for each of the pension funds and let you know what they are.
I think Ken knows it off the top of his head.
Mayor, for each of the funds, and I think Rick Rash, the police pension fund president, is here. I think over the past 20 years, both funds have averaged about 5.2, 5.3%, which is substantially less than the 6.875. We have seen it the last few years have been up in that range, of the closer to the 7%. Some of the reasons why that was lower in the past had to do with the types of investments that could be allocated in the accounts. So in the past, Rick, I think, give me a nod, but it used to be, I think, about 35% equities, and now it's up to about 55% equities. So there have been changes in the investment allocations, and as we've worked with each of the two pension funds, police and fire, we felt like this was the right thing to do to bring it down over these next 2 years, and then to kind of see what happens over a longer term. We're going to continue to monitor that. If you remember, I think going back about 6-7 years ago, it was at 7.75. So we have reduced it by next year, actually a full percentage point. But again, we will continue to monitor that.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody have any questions? John?
Rachel, just to kind of pick up on that same topic of discussion, the pensions and the rate of return and funding of the pension funds. Obviously, IMRF, they've pretty much given us a percentage, and we just fund that percentage.
Right.
With respect to the police and fire, who have their own, pension fund here at the city, there's an actuarial report that is completed, and that's why we're getting this difference as far as what assumptions we should use with respect to, the rates of return. I had a chance to review the budget since our last meeting, and it appears that we're budgeting about $163.6 million in $163.6 million in revenue and about $163.3 million in expenditures. I'm on the general fund now.
Right,
Yeah.
like I'm following you.
So we got about a $300,000 surplus there. And I believe you had mentioned during your last report that you did not include the additional contributions that would be required by the city going into the police and fire pension funds. You were going to take it out of reserves, so it's not in.
Right.
It's not
So
in
that's the update that I mentioned at the beginning, is that we did make two changes to the numbers that are in your that are in the proposed budget, because in order to be able to deposit within, we have to actually have the spending authority. So the $720,000, which is the increase for the public safety pension, that was the amount of money that the 7% to the 6.8%. That's what the difference in additional contribution amounted to, and so that amount will be funded. So if you look at on page in the budget, if you look at on page 2, if you were to look at the budgeted expenditures for the general fund, they're still at the 163.58, so 163.6 million. And then if you look underneath that on the general fund, the budgeted expenditures for 2014 are 164.3. So that's the $720,000 that we added to make that additional contribution to the pension funds, and then adding back the surplus, the $240-some thousand, to be able to do the strategic plan. That was what we were seeing as about the $300,000 surplus. That's added back as well.
So did we go from a $300,000 net surplus to now a deficit of about $400,000 because of the...
For the annual, yes.
For the annual?
Yep.
Okay. And then I guess the $720,000, that's just in year one, because then in the following year, we're looking at taking that rate of return from 6.875 to 6.750, which will be another $800,000 in 2015, I guess it would be.
Absolutely.
Okay. Where do you anticipate, I assume, I'm asking the question because I know the answer, the $400,000 loss, where do you anticipate that coming from? Fund balance,
Yes.
I assume?
Yes,
Okay.
fund balance.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of where I have a problem, and I don't know if anybody else on the council does. I guess I do have a fundamental problem of funding, using fund balance to fund our operations, and that's in essence what we're doing. I think that fund balance needs to be there, for either reserves or if we're making some type of capital improvement or capital investment. And I did see, I did notice that we had proposed budgeting hiring an additional 13 people, which I recognize, from the city's perspective, we are short. We are down at least 160 to 170 employees. I recognize that in all departments. But I think before we start hiring new personnel, we need to take care of our operations first. And I do have a bit of a problem using our fund balance, which is in essence our reserve, to fund operations, which is our current pension obligation. So I don't know if anybody else in the council has similar thoughts, but...
I will tell you, so the discussion that I've had with the current city manager and also the previous city manager is, I also, obviously being a financial person, I want to live within my means for the year. We, however, in 2013, our revenue estimates were fairly conservative, and so we have seen quite a bit better, our revenues have performed quite a bit better in 2013 than we originally had anticipated. So overall, I absolutely agree with you, Councilman Girl, that I wouldn't normally recommend that we dip into the fund balance to pay operations. However, our fund balance is still anticipated to increase between 2013 and 2014 because we are seeing a very large surplus in 2013, which is why I feel confident that for this year, plus with the new city manager's commitment to do a strategic plan in January to help us kind of realign our priorities and what our organization needs to look like. That's why for this 1 year, in order to help out the pension funds, which obviously the sooner we deposit in them, the better, because they, obviously, the bigger the balance, the better the investment return.
If I can refer you to page 8 of the proposed budget there, the second paragraph points out that our reserves will go up to $33.6 million. Our typical reserves have been 2 months of operating, which is 16%, and what we're looking at here is a 20% reserve. So we're adding approximately $2.6 million to that reserve, even with these expenditures.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, I guess I just don't want to see us get into the habit of dipping into that fund balance. It's kind of like, you know, if you're going to plan for your retirement, you want to start in your 20s, not your 50s. So I think that's why. And I have no problem with the, you know, with the discount rates that we're using by decreasing those discount rates, because we do have certain benchmarks that we have to hit, you know, at a certain period of time to get these funding balances in place for our pension funds.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Anyone else?
Rachel,
Yeah.
for the anticipated property tax, are we going to levy for the same rate as last year?
Not the same rate, the same levy, the total levy, which
Yeah,
is,
total.
yeah, the total levy is the same
It's going to
value.
be flat.
Yep, flat.
And then one more question.
Sure.
I noticed we had discussions with management salaries, not necessarily being in line with lower end personnel. Give you an example. A chief of police making one salary, a lieutenant making another salary, which is higher than the chief. Sorry, chief, to use you as an example. There was some discussion about dollars being put into the budget to kind of balance that out. I don't necessarily see that. Is that in here? And how are we going to pick and choose which positions are going to be, earmark those dollars?
That's, in the short time I've been here, I've taken a look at it and realized that there is some salary compression occurring because at different times, I know sacrifices have been made by union employees, but the exempt employees have made sacrifices as well. And with various stipends that some of the union employees get, when you promote, you don't necessarily make overtime anymore, and in the long run, you may not make as much money. So that is something that we'll take a look at. That may be longer term than just January in terms of a good resolution, because it's going to be different for the police department as it is from the fire department, as it is from other not exempt positions in the administrative side as well.
That's it.
If I can make one other comment, Mayor, on page 12, and I know last year the council had a controversial vote on raising the sales tax, but I just want to say the positive side of that, and something that's quite uncommon and that I've seen in Illinois cities. You'll see that sales tax reflects 27% of the revenues, while property tax only 20%. So the property tax as a percentage of the total revenue, I think, is extremely low compared to other communities in Illinois. And your sales tax, of course, is being paid by non-residents as well as residents who purchase goods and services in our city.
To latch on to Councilman McFarland, so there is money in the budget. It's just at this meeting that we have, we're going to decide how it's. Is that correct?
That'll be at a later date.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you. Anybody else? No. Thanks, Rachel. Okay.
Thank you.
So if I understand, your recommendation is to adopt this as it is, and then at the strategic planning meeting, we will decide what's going to go where?
We'll look back at the budget.
Right.
We'll see if we need to do some budget amendments to align our expenditures with what we decide are our priorities, and what objectives we establish are those that we want to fund to help reach those goals.
Okay, all right. Very good.
I have a question.
Sure.
Jim, will we be making suggestions along with Rachel as to tweaking this, or is this?
Certainly.
Okay.
No, I'll be making recommendations.
All right, thank you.
But again, it will be as an outgrowth of the strategic plan that we develop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question, Mayor.
Sure.
Just for clarification, Jim. So what we're doing is we're putting together an overall shell budget so that we can meet the 31st deadline.
True.
And really, we're going soft on the commitment of how much we're going to stick to the budget as opposed to moving monies around.
That's right. A budget is a plan. It's a spending plan for the fiscal year. As such, throughout the course of the year, you can change priorities. I always, whenever grant opportunities suddenly present themselves, undoubtedly there's some kind of matching funds that are required, and typically that's not in your budget. But it makes sense to decide if the grant funds that are available, if we can come up with that 20 or 30% matching, and it's something that we really want and need and think is good for the city, we should find the money and amend the budget to allocate funds towards getting that grant. So, yes, this is a placekeeper for now, and then we'll adjust after the strategic plan.
Very good. So is
So are we meeting one more time on this?
well, we can.
I guess I received this tonight. I haven't
Certainly.
had an opportunity to dissect everything in here, but there's some things that jump out at me with some of the, overtime's been a controversial issue prior to me getting on this council. I'm looking at some of these overtime numbers, how, to me, I'd like some explanation on them. I don't know if you want to do that today, or if you want
We
to.
still got a half hour. Go right ahead.
Well, if we,
I want to read this so, I
Sure.
can write out my
Yeah.
questions, but I think there's
Yeah.
something, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I don't want to just hand over a blank check.
right.
And, we approve this, we're giving you the authority to spend up into these dollar amounts.
Well,
And I trust you, but at the same time, I have a fiduciary duty to the residents of Joliet to make sure that I'm presenting a sound fiscal budget.
certainly. Again, I'm looking at this budget to be a placekeeper till we, in essence, it's buying time till we get through the strategic plan, decide, and I'll certainly be looking at filling full-time positions versus overtime costs, and deployment as well, and we'll integrate that into it. And I guess my point is that any point between now and once we complete the strategic plan, you've got the opportunity to make a list of these questions and bring them up publicly, or we can collect them, and we'll have another budget discussion very soon after the completion of the strategic plan.
Another question, Mayor.
Sure.
Jim, as far as before we follow through or make the final commitments, waiting for the strategic plan, how's that going to impact the capital purchases? Are we going to prioritize the ones that should be done right away, even before the plan is finished?
Yeah, we had over $7 million in requests from department heads, and we've proposed a little over $3.5 million. So at the completion of the strategic plan, you may say, let's take a look at all of these capital plans, because if you say roads are the top priority in the community and every other capital issue should be pushed to the side, then we'll bring forward all of those others. But the ones that are in here, we'll start working on right away, because a lot of them we want to get going for the construction season. They can't wait till February. I think at a minimum, we would be doing these projects no matter what. It's a question of what do you want to add to.
Because what kind of jumped out at me is, first, let me make it clear that every department is behind on refreshing their equipment, their fleet. Did I read it right? Are we looking at 14 police cars? Or am I misunderstanding something?
That's correct. It's 14 police cars. That's what's included in the capital recommendation.
Okay. Our entire fleet across departments is aged, but the police department, and I'd be happy to have the chief come up so I can question him or anybody can question him, the police department's fleet, and that's the one that has to respond every minute of every day and is constantly in motion. And we've got some problems with that. We've got some recalls. We've got some, well, do you have, Chief, an overview of what the fleet looks like right now?
We do. We did a pretty extensive study internally of our fleet. We worked with Dave Druzik from Motor Maintenance to try to come together with a plan that he felt was feasible from his side because, like you said, all the fleets are aging. Out of the 300-plus vehicles that we have, a third of them are over 100,000 miles. But I know that people are holding on to their cars longer. The technology is allowing the vehicles to last longer. I worked with Dave. I compiled a list of all the vehicles, the miles, who they're assigned to, the cars that we have currently in rotation for pool car status, and trusted that he came up with a proposal that would meet our needs. I didn't see his final proposal. I saw the 14 that were requested. It was my belief that he was going to ask for more. But again, I trust that he's able to keep the fleet up with what he's put forth in front of the city manager and finance director. And like I said, we're driving the cars. They're fixing them. So I trust that they know what they're doing as far as their ability to keep running what we have.
Do you have any idea, from my understanding too, is that we're getting awfully thin on the backup?
We are. We actually had to pull out some of the pool cars at one point because we were running short on them. We've since moved some things around, reallocated people, put a couple two-man cars out there, and used our transport vans, which we like to use sparingly in order to have adequate vehicles for them. Vehicles are definitely an issue for us. We prioritized internally when we came up with our capital plan. We know that the computers that go in the vehicles are very critical because that's what the officers do the reports on. We know the new CAD interface is going to be due sometime around May. The field-based computer system that they use is going to be updated so that about 80 of our in-car computers are not going to function anymore. So we prioritize that need for the in-car computers, but we need the vehicles to put them in as well. So it's going to be a priority for us, the computers and then the vehicles, in that order.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, sir.
Anybody else? It's your pleasure. You want to have another meeting? You want to adopt this?
I'd like to read it.
Okay. The next meeting is scheduled December. Somebody,
Mayor, we have to have an official public hearing, which has to be advertised, and
Okay.
and so the budget cannot be adopted until
That will
after
be
December
when?
2nd.
December
The
2nd?
earliest it could be adopted would be
Next
December
Monday.
3rd.
All right, very good.
Or 2 weeks.
Very good. That's it.
Jim, did you say that Chief Formals had to speak? Was that about the budget, or was that a separate issue?
No, I said if you had questions about the SAFER grant, as far as funding of the one additional firefighter that we needed to fill in January.
When you say extension, are we getting a third year?
No, because we've fallen down in our numbers. We're down to 201, I believe, and we committed to maintaining 209 as part of the SAFER grant. Whenever we fall below because of retirements, we've got to notify the federal government, and they're asking us, okay, when are you going to replace those people? And so at the moment, they give us extensions on those replacements and deadlines. So we committed to hiring at least one other person in January.
Chief, do you know where we're at with the waivers? I mean, I just remember a lot of talk about waivers, so.
What we did when we went into the SAFER grant was we had 201 firefighters. We received the SAFER money to hire 8 firefighters. That brought us up to 209. We had retirements in September of 12, 11 of 12, January of 13, and February of 13. Those 4 retirements, we placed waivers with the federal government. Traditionally, what is supposed to happen is once a retirement happens, you have 6 months to replace that individual. What we did was we put in 2 different waivers and received okays on those waivers to not have to replace those 4 firefighters. Then we had 4 additional retirements in 2013. We had an individual leave in July, August, September, and October of 13. So we have not received waivers on those 4 people. So the individual that retired in July, theoretically, we should be replacing him in the end of January, because that would be the 6-month window would be up for that individual. And then the next individual, February, March, and April. But that's to get us back to 209. That's what we committed to, the number that we committed to staying at. So moving forward, in the budget, we've requested to bring our staffing back up to 209 firefighters, basically where we were last year in January. And we're saying that by having the 209, we're going to be able to save some money on overtime. I think about $220,000, I think, is what we're anticipating. If we do hire 8 individuals, the earliest that we could get them started would probably be, what did I have here? I believe it was April or May, because we have to assume that the individuals that we're hiring do not have their firefighter 2. Now, when I look at the eligibility list, because we do have a brand-new eligibility list that we created, this new eligibility list requires the individuals on it to be paramedics, but does not require them to have their firefighter 2. But for me to be able to hire them and use them, I need them to be firefighter 2s, because our people are cross-trained. They do fire and EMS. So what I have to assume is that none of them are going to have their firefighter 2. But when I look down the list, there are a number of them that do have their firefighter 2, but I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know who we're going to hire. We might go right down the list. We might not go down the list. So when I look at my numbers and whatnot, I have to assume the worst case scenario, I guess, that all of them have to go for their firefighter 2. So with that being said, it looks like the first academy doesn't take place until April or May of next year, so we wouldn't really be able to replace this person in January until then, because I can't get them to an academy. So what I would do is I would submit a waiver request explaining that to the federal government. I'm sure that they would be able to work with us, because what they want to see is us replacing people. And if we're on a path to do that, I'm more than positive that they would give us the leeway to get that person, if need be, in and be trained, in May to go through the academy. Now, if that individual, if we hire them and they're already a firefighter 2, if we bring them on board, they're just going to eat into the overtime costs. So that's a plus to us, because the sooner we get them, the more overtime money we'll be able to eat away at by having those people here.
So the one that we would hire in January is, I think if I heard your explanation correct, Chief, would replace the person who retired in July?
In July, correct.
Did we apply for a waiver as we did for the 4 prior to him?
I have not applied for a waiver for these 4 individuals. What we did with our last waiver was basically we told the federal government that we were going to look at the 2014 budget, I should say, 2013 budget also, where we were ending up, and we would try to make, if we saw that we were moving in a positive direction with the economy, economic recovery and whatnot, that we would make an honest attempt to try to replace 4, if not all 8 of these individuals. That's the way that the last variance was written.
All right, thanks for the explanation, Chief.
Just for clarification, I know the Chief stated that they may not go right down the list. These individuals that are on the list still have to pass the psychological, the background, and the lie detector test before they're hired. This list is only a list of those that pass the written and oral examination.
Correct, yes.
Man, I have a question. I'm sorry, Jim.
You were first.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chief. Maybe I misunderstood. When I saw the proposal for 8 new firemen, I guess my assumption was that was for the 8 contingency that we have with the SAFER grant. We haven't really hired those people yet because we're not paying for them. You're saying besides those 8, you want 8 more, 16?
No. This is 8 firefighters to get us back to 209, the number that we had when we hired the SAFER.
Are you counting the 8 that got hired with the SAFER grant?
Well, we hired 8 with the SAFER. We had 201 when we started the SAFER process. We got 8 people with the SAFER grant, so that brought our number up to 209. And then subsequent to that, we've lost 8 individuals through retirements, bringing our number back down to 201. So that's where we're at today. We're at 201.
But the salaries for those 8 are paid for by the SAFER grant, correct? That was the point of taking the grant, I thought.
That is correct. So the total number of firefighters that is included in the entire budget for 2014 is 209. So the 8 would have to be funded through the general. The new 8 would have to be funded through the general fund, but the original 8 are still on that grant. The $1 million that's left is for 2014, and those 8 will be funded through the grant for 2014.
So you're saying 8 this year, 8 next year then? Because we're going to have to assume that cost at some point.
If we keep the staffing level at 209, yes.
Yes.
And that, of course, there's going to be more retirements or guys leaving on disability. I guess
it's always
very open-ended. We were told numbers a couple years ago or a year and a half ago, and it doesn't seem like those numbers are really coming to fruition.
Well, we told you that this would bring you up to 209. I believe I told you that at that time I couldn't predict when somebody was going to retire. That's the question I think that everybody posed. And let me just look down the list of what I told you was the only sure thing, I guess, and that's not even a sure thing, is that I can pretty much guarantee that somebody's going to leave when they have 30 years on, when they're 50 years of age and have attained 30 years of employment with the Joliet Fire Department. That's where they max out with their pension. Of the 8 people that just left, we have one guy that had 25 years that chose to leave, one guy that had 28 years, one guy that had 23 years, I believe, one guy that had 26 years, and the other 4 had right around 20, 21 years. And there were some disability pensions out of the 8 individuals. I had 4 disability pensions. So 4 and 4.
And obviously you can't predict that. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's where I'm coming back to. We're saying the number's going to be at 209, but in reality it probably won't be at 209 unless we replace those extra people that leave. That's 209 if nobody leaves. So we can hire all these people and still not save any overtime money. And it would appear likely that that's what's going to happen.
Well, the only thing I can tell you is if you don't hire the people and you maintain a staffing level of 201 and you continue to want to staff the way we're staffing, and I have to remind you that Ambulance 9 is not being utilized at all. Basically, through the year we've taken it out of service to help us with overtime. Ambulance 9's been in service 23 days this year. So something has to give. You either have to have the personnel to staff the positions, or you have to take the positions out.
Yeah,
it's like playing, right field out when you're playing baseball. I mean, we need staffing level of basically 54 people a day to staff all these vehicles. And if we don't have the 54 people a day, then we end up taking things out of service. And that's what we're doing right now with Ambulance 9. We're taking it out of service almost every day to use those 2 individuals in other spots, basically as floaters.
Is it possible, Chief, and I mean, you're the fire chief, I'm not, but if the ambulances do the bulk of the calls, and I think we know they do, is it possible to keep the ambulances in service and take something else out of service?
No, it's not. We went through that with the variance agreements that we had with Local 44 for, what was that, Ken, 2009, 2010, or 2010, 2011. We were able to negotiate with them to take one firefighter off of 5 different pieces of equipment throughout the course of the year, and we did see substantial overtime savings, but that was a variance, a contractual variance that they entered into with us for 2 years, and that has subsequently gone to the wayside. So right now, we do need to maintain the engines in the engine houses and have them staffed at the 3-person minimum that we staff them at contractually.
Yes.
Chief, since we're on this topic, you mentioned with the hiring of one additional firefighter for 2014 that we would decrease overtime by about $200,000. Is there an explanation of why in this year's budget we're proposing a 128% increase, or $961,000 more?
No.
Than last year?
It wouldn't be one. It would be if we had the 8 firefighters. If we were back up to 209, our overtime we would probably save about $220,000 in overtime. It wouldn't just be one. It would be if we could get back to 209 individuals every day, and then we would still be taking the ambulance out of service, Ambulance 9, on an as-needed basis before we hired overtime. So 209 individuals, 209 firefighters gives us 10 floaters per shift. 10 fill-in people, substitutes, whatever you want to call them, and then the 2 guys on the ambulance give me 12 people per shift. So what I end up running every day is there are some 10-man days with people being off on vacations and Kelly days. Most of the days are 9-man days, but I do average about 3.6 people sick in Local 44 every day. So that 9-man day now becomes a 10, 11, 12.6-man day. So that's where the overtime comes in. That's where, if I had 209 people all year long, the overtime for Local 44 would be kept in check, because we're taking those 2 people off the ambulance, putting those over there to fill for the absenteeism, and we'd have 12 floaters a day.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, one more question.
Sure.
Chief, to follow up on Councilman Oderkirk's question, I don't know if I understood your question or if I didn't understand the answer. I think he was asking if we have 2 or 3 pieces in a house, if you have 2 people calling or 3 people calling sick, am I wrong, Councilman? Why not leave the ambulance up and take the truck down? Was that the question?
More or less, yeah.
Well, contractually, you have Local 2369. Their contract requires an officer be in every station, and the officers are bid or ride on the fire trucks or the ladder trucks. So contractually, we have to have an officer in every station. So if we took an engine out of service for the day and reallocated those 2 individuals, you'd have an officer that was basically just standing by at the station. He wouldn't be responding on the ambulance calls with the ambulance. The other thing is coverage for fires. I mean, we do have firefighters on our ambulances, but the ambulances don't have any water when we do go to fire calls. So taking those pieces of equipment, those red pieces of equipment out of service, are going to mean increased response times for fire calls. Not going to allow our people to make entry into structures until the subsequent engine would get into that run area, because we're held to OSHA requirements with 2 in and 2 out. That require us to have 5 people on the scene before we make entry into a structure. So that's basically it. I mean, the requirements we are dealing with 2 different contracts that require staffing on the fire trucks and the stations.
How often with a scenario like that, if I understand that you're saying that if we had a fire call where there was a building on fire, then we would increase our response time if engine 3 was down. How often would that happen if the engine was out of service that day, if you chose to do that as management rights, versus having increased response time because we have an ambulance out? You know what I'm saying? Which ones have more calls?
Well, obviously, the ambulances have more calls. We probably run about 16,000 ambulance calls a year, 17,000, probably about 3,000 fire calls a year. So, I mean, we are an EMS-based fire department. Every fire department is that way nowadays. But like I said, Councilman Hugg, I think you'd be hard-pressed to be able to do that with the contracts that we just negotiated with both the bargaining groups.
And I guess the only other question when we were on the topic, you had mentioned that there was 23 or 28 days that Ambulance 9, one of the ambulances in District 1, that I certainly represent, have been in service only 23? Or
23 days.
23 days. So the remaining days, it's been out of service.
It's been out of service.
Okay. And I've had some, a few calls from different folks either involved in the fire service itself or maybe some residents. Mm-hmm. And actually, I've not been able to explain to them why it's always Ambulance 9, why it's not rotated. If, in fact, as the chief, you have to, for budgetary reasons or what have you, pull a ambulance out of all 9, why it's always the same one.
Well, what we did was we looked at call volume, and we looked at ability to respond in and out of areas, and we also looked at the 2-in, 2-out requirement. As I said before, we need to have 5 firefighters established at the scene to make entry. So if we were to take Ambulance 10 out of service, we're leaving them out there with an engine with 3 individuals on it. So they would have to wait to make entry until an ambulance or an engine got in there, got into their run area, got into the location where they were at. In looking at everything, it made more sense to take Ambulance 9 out of service because you had Ambulance 10 and Ambulance 8 responding into 9's area. Station 9 has a ladder truck staffed with 3 individuals and an engine staffed with 3 individuals every day. That's 6 people right there. So they meet the 2-in, 2-out requirement with their manning for entry into a structure that was on fire. Engine 9 is an ALS vehicle, so there are paramedics service on that vehicle. Paramedics that would be able to respond and stabilize a patient until Ambulance 8 or Ambulance 10 responded in. So those basically were the reasons why we chose Ambulance 9.
Okay, so and what other houses have the same setup? Ladder truck?
The only other station that has a ladder truck engine and ambulance is Station 1. And the domino effect, if you were to take Ambulance 1 out of service, because Ambulance 1, Ambulance 5, Ambulance 6 are your 3 busiest ambulances, I think the domino effect would be detrimental to the flow of the rest of the fire department.
And then I guess the last question,
I believe Ambulance 1 does about 2,600 calls a year, 2,700 calls a year. Ambulance 9 was probably making 1,100 calls a year, something like that.
And I guess the last question, you described earlier, explained that, when you have to have a truck in service.
Yes.
Because under the contract, we have to have the officer of that house on a truck. Mm-hmm. Again, if we're running so many ambulance calls in 9, when we can stabilize this and get all pieces up, that's the dream, that's the goal, to get all pieces running, right? Mm-hmm. Why would we not just take the ladder out or the engine out on 9? And, we still have a truck for the officer, and we still have the more used ambulance going.
Well, in negotiations with Local 2369, during the 2-year period, we were taking the officer off of that ladder truck. We were taking the officer off of ladder truck 9 and ladder truck 1. And that saved us some overtime money also. But in negotiations in 2012, Ken? 13, 14, 15, yeah. In 2012, we did commit to staffing that officer on both trucks. We did that on a graduated scale. We didn't place both officers back instantaneously. We placed the officer on truck 1 back into service first, and then I believe January of 2013, I believe that's when we started staffing the officer on truck 9. So that was through negotiations. We contractually agreed to staff the officer positions on the 2 ladder trucks. If we were to take ladder truck 9 out of service, the next in ladder truck for that area would be Tower 6, which is over by Joliet West High School. So you can see that request for ladder truck for an aerial and for extrication equipment would be coming from quite a distance away out to where your residents are living out there. So we found that to be unacceptable also.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I do have one question. Chief, just for clarification, did I hear you right when you said you had an average of 3.5 firemen per day calling sick every day?
Well,
Is that correct?
that is a combination of sick and workman's comp, and light duty. So people that are out, 3.6.
Okay.
So it's not just sick, it would be a combination of people that bodies that I can't use.
So that
for
would
the day.
account for a lot of the overtime then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Just in time. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn the special meeting.
Second.
Motion and seconded to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting adjourned.